The sun was setting over the training camp when Lieutenant Marcus Webb made his statement. He stood tall among the other soldiers, his voice carrying across the mess hall. Sarah Chen sat at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She heard every word he said about women not belonging in combat units. Marcus was not a bad man. He came from a military family where his father and grandfather had served with honor. In his mind, he was simply being realistic. The battlefield was brutal, and he believed women lacked the physical strength needed for real combat. He said these things openly, never thinking about who might be listening or how his words might hurt. Sarah had joined the Army 2 years ago. She was smaller than most of the men in her unit, standing at 5 feet 4 inches tall. Her frame was lean, but every muscle had been earned through countless hours of training. She did not talk much about why she joined. Some people whispered that she had something to prove. Others said she was running from a difficult past. The truth was simpler. She wanted to serve her country and protect people who could not protect themselves. When Marcus spoke those words in the mess hall, Sarah did not react. She did not slam her cup down or argue with him. She simply looked at him for a moment, then returned to her meal. Her friend Lisa, who sat across from her, started to say something, but Sarah shook her head. There was no point in arguing. Words would not change his mind. Only actions could do that. The next morning, their unit received orders. They were being deployed to a conflict zone where tensions had been rising for months. The briefing room fell silent as the commanding officer explained the mission. They would be providing support to local forces and helping secure a region that had seen increased enemy activity. It was dangerous work, but every person in that room had trained for exactly this type of situation. Marcus and Sarah were assigned to the same squad. When Marcus saw the assignment list, he approached the commanding officer privately. He expressed his concerns about having Sarah in the unit during such a critical mission. The officer listened patiently, then told Marcus that Sarah had passed every qualification test, just like everyone else. She had earned her place. And that was the end of the discussion. During the flight to the deployment zone, Marcus sat near the front of the transport plane, while Sarah sat in the back. She checked her equipment 3 times, making sure everything was secure and ready. Her rifle was clean, her gear was packed properly, and her mind was focused. She knew some people doubted her, but she had stopped caring about their opinions long ago. The only opinion that mattered was her own, and she knew she was ready for whatever came next. The base they arrived at was surrounded by mountains and dry desert. Dust covered everything, and the heat during the day was almost unbearable. At night, the temperature dropped so quickly that soldiers needed heavy jackets just to stand guard. The local population was caught between different armed groups. The situation could change from peaceful to dangerous in seconds. Sarah adapted quickly to the new environment. She volunteered for extra patrols and helped strengthen the defensive positions around the base. During one particularly long night watch, she sat in a guard tower with a soldier named Danny, who had been in the Army for 5 years. He told her about his family back home and showed her pictures of his 2 daughters. Sarah listened and shared a little about her own life, though she kept most details private. Marcus kept his distance from Sarah during those first weeks. He worked with the other men in the squad, planning patrols and coordinating with local forces. He was good at his job, and the commanding officer trusted his judgment on tactical matters. But whenever Sarah was mentioned in briefings or meetings, Marcus would shift uncomfortably. He still believed she was a liability, even though she had not made a single mistake since their arrival. One afternoon, the squad was called for a mission briefing. Intelligence reports suggested that a nearby village was being threatened by an armed group. The villagers had requested help, and the squad was ordered to investigate and provide assistance if needed. It was supposed to be a routine mission, the kind they had done dozens of times before. They would arrive, assess the situation, and either stay to provide security or return to base. The convoy left early the next morning. 3 vehicles carried the 12 members of the squad, along with supplies and equipment. Marcus rode in the lead vehicle as the squad leader. Sarah was in the second vehicle with Danny and 2 other soldiers. The road was rough, full of potholes and damaged sections that forced the drivers to slow down frequently as they traveled. Sarah watched the landscape carefully. She had studied maps of the area and memorized key features that might be important during the mission. The mountains to the east could provide cover if needed. The open plains to the west offered no protection, but would allow them to see threats from a distance. Every detail mattered in a place like this, where danger could appear without warning. The village came into view after 2 hours of driving. Smoke rose from several buildings and people were running in different directions. Before the convoy could stop, gunfire erupted from multiple positions. The windshield of the lead vehicle shattered, and the driver swerved sharply to avoid incoming fire. Marcus shouted orders over the radio, telling everyone to take cover and return fire. Sarah jumped from the second vehicle before it fully stopped. She moved quickly to a position behind a concrete wall, her rifle already raised and ready. Bullets kicked up dust around her, but she stayed focused. She identified enemy positions and began returning fire with careful, controlled shots. Training had prepared her for this moment, and her body moved automatically, doing exactly what it had been taught to do. The firefight was intense and chaotic. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves in buildings and behind vehicles throughout the village. They had clearly planned this ambush, knowing that help would come when the villagers called for assistance. The squad was pinned down, unable to advance or retreat safely. Every time someone tried to move, bullets would force them back into cover. Marcus coordinated the defense from behind the lead vehicle. He called out enemy positions and directed fire to keep the attackers from overwhelming their position. His voice was steady despite the danger, and his experience showed in how he managed the situation. But they were outnumbered, and ammunition would not last forever. They needed to either break through the enemy positions or call for reinforcements and wait for help to arrive. Sarah noticed something that others had missed. On the eastern side of the village, there was a gap in the enemy fire pattern. A narrow alley between two buildings offered a possible route to flank the main enemy position. If someone could reach that alley and move through it, they could attack from an unexpected angle and break the stalemate. She tried to reach Marcus on the radio to tell him about the opportunity, but the radio crackled with static and other voices. Communication was breaking down under the pressure of combat, making a quick decision. Sarah signaled to Danny that she was moving. Before he could stop her, she sprinted from her cover toward the alley. Bullets hit the ground around her feet, and she heard shouting in multiple languages. Her heart pounded as she ran faster than she had ever run in training. The alley entrance was only 30 yards away, but it felt like miles. Time seemed to slow down, and every step took enormous effort. She reached the alley and pressed herself against the wall, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline, but she forced herself to calm down. Taking several deep breaths, she checked her rifle and prepared to move through the alley. The narrow passage was littered with trash and debris, and the walls on either side were pockmarked with bullet holes from previous conflicts. As Sarah moved through the alley, she heard an explosion. The sound was deafening, and the ground shook beneath her feet. She turned back and saw smoke rising from where the lead vehicle had been. Her stomach dropped. Someone had used a rocket or grenade on Marcus's position. She ran back toward the entrance of the alley, forgetting her flanking plan. All that mattered now was helping her squad. When she emerged from the alley, the scene was worse than she had imagined. The lead vehicle was burning, and 2 soldiers were lying on the ground, either wounded or dead. Danny was trying to drag one of them to safety while under fire. Marcus was on the ground near the vehicle, not moving. Blood covered the side of his head, and his left leg was bent at an unnatural angle. Sarah did not hesitate. She ran toward Marcus while firing her rifle to suppress the enemy positions. Bullets whistled past her, so close she could feel the air move. She reached Marcus and dropped down beside him, checking for signs of life. His pulse was weak, but present. He was unconscious, possibly from a head injury sustained in the explosion. His leg was badly broken, and he was losing blood from several wounds. Sarah knew she had to move Marcus away from the burning vehicle. Ammunition inside the vehicle could explode at any moment, killing anyone nearby. But Marcus was a large man, weighing at least 200 pounds with all his gear. Moving him would be difficult even under normal circumstances. Under heavy fire, it seemed almost impossible. Still, she had no choice. Leaving him meant certain death. She grabbed Marcus under his arms and started dragging him backward. The weight was enormous, and her muscles screamed in protest. Every inch felt like a mile. Bullets continued to hit the ground around them, and she knew it was only a matter of time before one found its target. She pulled harder, ignoring the pain in her shoulders and back. Marcus's boots scraped against the dirt, leaving 2 long trails behind them. Danny saw what Sarah was doing and provided covering fire. He emptied an entire magazine toward enemy positions, forcing them to take cover and giving Sarah precious seconds. She used those seconds to drag Marcus another 10 yards, getting him behind a low wall that offered some protection. Her arms felt like they might fall off. Sweat poured down her face, despite the relatively cool morning air. But they were not safe yet. The wall would not protect them from the enemy fighters who were now moving to surround their position. Sarah realized they needed to retreat completely. To get back to where the rest of the squad had established a defensive position, that meant moving Marcus at least another 50 yards across open ground. She looked at the distance and wondered if she had the strength to do it. Marcus stirred slightly, his eyes opening for just a moment. He looked confused, trying to understand where he was and what was happening. Sarah leaned close to his ear and told him to stay still, that she would get him out. He tried to say something, but the words came out unclear. Then his eyes closed again, and his body went limp. Sarah checked his pulse again. Still there, but weaker now. Time was running out. She decided that dragging him was too slow. She would have to carry him. Years of training had strengthened her body, but she had never attempted to carry someone Marcus's size over any distance. Drill sergeants had made them practice carrying wounded soldiers, but those exercises used lighter people and shorter distances. This was different. This was real, and failure meant death for both of them. Sarah positioned herself carefully, getting Marcus onto her shoulders in a fireman's carry. The weight nearly drove her to her knees, but she locked her legs and forced herself to stand. The world seemed to tilt, and for a moment she thought she would fall. But she found her balance, adjusted Marcus's weight, and took her first step. Then another. And another. Danny and 2 other soldiers provided covering fire as Sarah began the long walk back to the defensive position. Enemy fighters were everywhere now, and the volume of incoming fire increased dramatically. Sarah moved as quickly as she could, but each step was agony. Her legs trembled under the weight, and her lungs burned from the effort of breathing. Marcus's gear dug into her shoulders, and she could feel warm blood from his wounds soaking into her uniform. Sarah had walked about 20 yards when her right leg nearly gave out. She stumbled but caught herself at the last second, preventing both her and Marcus from crashing to the ground. She paused for just a moment, trying to gather strength, but bullets hitting nearby forced her to keep moving. Stopping meant dying. She thought about her training, about all the times instructors had pushed her beyond what she thought was possible. This was just another test, she told herself. Just another challenge to overcome. The distance to safety seemed to grow rather than shrink. Every step took more effort than the last. Her vision started to blur around the edges, and she realized she was close to exhaustion. But she could see the defensive position ahead. Danny and the others were waving her forward, urging her to keep going. She focused on their faces and blocked out everything else. The gunfire became background noise. The pain became something happening to someone else. All that mattered was reaching that position with Marcus still alive at the 30-yard mark. Sarah felt something hit her left side. At first, she thought it was debris from a nearby impact. Then, she felt warmth spreading across her ribs and realized she had been grazed by a bullet. The wound was not deep, but it added to her growing list of injuries. She gritted her teeth and kept walking. Pain was temporary. Giving up was permanent. Marcus regained consciousness briefly and realized what was happening. Through his confusion and pain, he understood that Sarah was carrying him. The woman he had said was too weak for combat was now saving his life. He tried to tell her to leave him, that she should save herself. But his voice was too weak, and his words were lost in the sound of gunfire. Sarah either did not hear him or chose to ignore him. She just kept walking. With 15 yards remaining, Sarah's legs finally began to fail. She stumbled forward, fighting to stay upright. The soldiers at the defensive position could see she was in trouble. 2 of them, against orders, ran out to help her. They reached her just as her knees buckled. Together, They carried Marcus the final distance while Sarah collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. Her body had given everything it had. The squad medic immediately began working on Marcus. He stabilized the broken leg, stopped the bleeding from the head wound, and started an IV to replace lost fluids. Marcus would need surgery and months of recovery, but he would survive. The medic then turned to Sarah, who was still lying on the ground. He checked her wounds and found the bullet graze along with severe muscle strain and dehydration. Nothing life-threatening, but she would be in significant pain for days. As the medic worked, reinforcements arrived. Helicopters appeared overhead and additional troops moved into the village to drive out the remaining enemy fighters. The ambush had been broken, though at a terrible cost. 2 soldiers from the squad had died in the initial explosion. Several others were wounded, but more would have died if not for the actions of individuals like Sarah and Danny who refused to abandon their fellow soldiers. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness as they prepared to evacuate him. During one lucid moment, he looked around and saw Sarah sitting against a wall nearby. Her uniform was torn and covered in blood, both his and hers. Her face showed exhaustion beyond anything he had seen before. She noticed him looking at her, and their eyes met. No words were spoken, but everything changed in that moment. Every prejudice, every assumption he had held, melted away. She had proven him wrong in the most profound way possible. 3 weeks later, Sarah visited Marcus in the military hospital. He was sitting up in bed, his legs suspended in traction, and his head still wrapped in bandages. When he saw her enter the room, he tried to sit up straighter, but pain stopped him. Sarah walked slowly to his bedside. Her own injuries were healing, but she still moved carefully to avoid aggravating strained muscles. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. He thanked her for saving his life. Then he did something Sarah never expected. He apologized. He apologized for every dismissive comment, every doubt, every time he had questioned whether women belonged in combat. He told her that his beliefs had been based on ignorance and pride, not reality. Sarah listened without interrupting. When he finished, she simply nodded. She did not need elaborate apologies or dramatic gestures. The fact that he understood and acknowledged his mistakes was enough. She told him that she had not carried him 5 miles through enemy fire to prove a point or win an argument. She did it because that was what soldiers do for each other. Gender did not matter on the battlefield. Only courage, skill, and determination mattered. Marcus asked her how she found the strength to carry him such a distance. Sarah smiled slightly and said she did not know. In that moment, she simply did what needed to be done. Fear of failure was stronger than physical exhaustion. The thought of leaving him behind was impossible to accept. So she kept walking, one step at a time, until they reached safety. There was no secret technique or special training. There was only will. They talked for over an hour that day. Marcus told her about his family and how his father had shaped his views about military service. He explained that he had been taught that men were protectors and women needed protection. Combat was a man's responsibility because men were naturally stronger and more aggressive. But Sarah had shown him that strength came in many forms, and courage was not determined by gender. Real strength was doing the impossible when everything inside you screamed to quit. Before Sarah left the hospital, Marcus asked if they could stay in touch after he recovered. He wanted to make things right, not just with words but with actions. When he returned to duty, he planned to speak up when others made the same mistakes he had made. He would share his story and help change minds the way his mind had been changed. Sarah agreed, and they exchanged contact information. Months passed. Marcus recovered and returned to active duty. True to his word, he became an advocate for equality in military service. When younger soldiers expressed doubts about women in combat roles, he would tell them about the day Sarah carried him to safety. He described how she refused to give up even when her body was failing. He explained that he owed his life to someone he had once dismissed as weak. Sarah continued her service, earning respect from everyone who worked with her. She never sought recognition for what she did that day. The official report mentioned her actions, and she received a commendation for valor. but she kept the medal in a drawer and rarely spoke about the incident. For her, it was simply part of the job she had signed up to do. Years later, after both had left active duty, they remained friends. They would meet occasionally to share coffee and catch up on each other's lives. Marcus often said that Sarah taught him the most important lesson of his military career. True strength is not about physical power or aggression. It is about refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. It is about carrying others when they cannot carry themselves. And it has nothing to do with whether you are a man or a woman. It has everything to do with the content of your character and the depth of your commitment to those beside you.